Right, so today we're doing episode 5 of the new React 2021 series. Today's episode is all about events in React. So how do you create events? How do you add them into what will eventually become the DOM for your website? How do you add events to components? So we're going to look at that. If you're looking for the code, the starter code for this episode, episode 5, is going to be the finished code from episode 4. So the link to the repo is down in the description. The branches, there's one per episode. Episode 4 will be the starter code. Episode 5 branch is going to be the finished code for this episode. So you can decide if you want to follow along and edit, or if you just want to take the finished version and then play with that. All right, so synthetic events. This is what React does for your JSX. It creates synthetic events, meaning it has events that it then sort of maps to the existing vanilla JavaScript events. And it's pretty much a one-to-one thing. Inside the synthetic events, you've got all of the standard things that you would get as properties of an event. So whether it bubbles, if it's cancelable, the current target property, the target property, the type of event, is it a click, is it a mouse over, is it a key down, key up, key press, form submit, whatever it is. And then we've got the methods for prevent default and stop propagation. We're going to be using the prevent default one today, so you get to see some of these things. The different types of events. You can see there's a long list of the different types of events, and these map to what you would find in vanilla JavaScript. If you go onto the MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network website, and you look at events, you're going to see these classifications of events, or almost all these. If we scan down through them, this synthetic events page just gives us references for the different different classifications. Focus and blur are the focus events, and there's some little code samples here as well. The form events. So on the form element, you've got on change, input, on invalid, on reset, on submit. We've got mouse events. Lots of mouse events, just like you would writing vanilla JavaScript. Okay, so the link to this page, the synthetic events page, is down in the description. And we can also go into the main concept section, and there's a part on handling events. So this gives you a little bit more background information. Instead of just sort of listing everything, handling events explains how they work, which is what I'm going to do today, but this is a good reference afterwards. So let's jump into the code. Here we are, the starting code for episode 5, and I'm going to start up my web server here, my development server, by running yarn start to get this up and running. And once that's done, we'll jump back into here. Okay. So we have here our app.js files. This is the core of our application. This is sort of the first main top level component. Everything else is inside that. We have our header component, and this is all inside of our components folder. There's the app, which contains header. Header contains nav. Nav contains several links. So these are the components that we have right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another component here. So I'm going to add another folder, and we're going to call this one search bar. So the folder is called search bar. Inside of that, we're going to add a search bar.js file, and we're also going to add inside of there search bar.css. So we're going to be adding some content into those. This is where we're going to experiment with the events. We'll start with one, just inside of app. Now, if you've ever seen old HTML, you may have seen where people can write onClick equals and then calling a function. So let's say this was my HTML. Long time ago, before it became standard with JavaScript, people would do this. They'd say onClick and then whatever the name of your function is, like this. And this would allow for when the person clicks on the element, this is going to run. Now with React, what we have are something that looks a lot like that. So JSX looks like HTML. This looks like the onClick listener. It's one of the synthetic events. And we're just going to be putting the name of the function that we want to call. So if inside of here I were to create, so this is inside my function app, not inside the return, but inside the function app, I will create a function called myfunc, and it will be receiving an event object, and we could do something like this, console.log ev.target, and that should return to me the thing that was being clicked. Now, this looks like it's going to work. The syntax is effectively correct. We've got a function. Function's written properly, console.log. It's a simple thing to do. OnClick is a synthetic event listener. So this looks on the surface like everything should be fine, that this should be working. However, if I jump over into here and I open up my console, there it is. In my header, so defined but never used, that was because I wrote it before I did the other one. Here we can just refresh, that'll be, oh yeah, there it is. Okay, so this is the error that I was talking about. If I actually click on the header, nothing is happening. I'm not getting that called, and it's telling me it's defined but never used. And if you look at your code, you can say, well, yeah, it looks kind of like this. Oh, wait, no, we've got curly braces because this is React. So you think, all right, this is now solved. I've saved it, refreshed my page. Now I've got the same name here and it's inside the curly braces. So that's the way React likes to do things. I'll jump back in here. We'll refresh this once again. My error is gone. I'm clicking inside of here, clicking in the header element, but nothing's happening. And that is because we have this onClick inside of our component. So header is this thing that we're importing. It's a component that we're bringing in. That means we can't really do this. What we're doing right here, I'm going to give you just a little temp.js file, just a sample to show what we're effectively doing here. So let's split this up so you can see both at the same time. I'll close that. Okay, so here you can see we've got our function app. There's a function myfunc. We've got a header component with the onClick. Now, onClick synthetic event, when it runs through Babel, it's going to be the ES6 or ES5 code, and that should be using add event listener to add the event to my component, to my page, to my HTML is what I'm expecting. But what we've actually done is something like this. If I'm saying that we have a variable called name, company name, and then we've got something called header, we really just have an object, and it's got a property called company, and it's going to be equal to name. So this variable is being used as the value for this property of our header object. And then it's like we've done this. Header.addEventListener, click, and we're going to run whatever the function is. We called it myfunc, like that. So we're saying that this, well, it could be header.myfunc, and we can define it inside of here to say myfunc is a method inside of here like this. But this is effectively what we've done. It's like we're trying to add a click listener to a JavaScript object. And if you've written any script for the browser, you know that's not going to do anything. We actually have to put the listeners for our events on the HTML. So this is not going to work, and I'll save that. I'll leave it inside of that folder so you can take a look at the file and compare it and work it out if you want. And we'll just close that one. There we go. So we're back to here. If I take this, remove it from there, remove it from the component, and I place it inside of a piece of HTML or JSX that will render to actual HTML, like this, now that is going to work. Now I have a click event on something that is actually going to turn into HTML, to a DOM element. When I come back here and I click, there we go. The target is the H1 or the header element. So depending on what I'm clicking on, I have added the listener to my div. Because I added it to the div, now this all works. So one thing which doesn't look like an error is not going to register as an error. It may be counterintuitive, like it may look like your code is supposed to run, but it's something to watch for. So add it to your things that are actually going to turn into HTML elements. Don't add it to components. Components, this isn't going to work. All right, so we've added, I'm going to just remove this from in here. We're not going to use that. I'm going to create some new events in the new component that we're building. So we're going to bring in that search bar that we're going to build. So we import our search bar, and now we can come down here and actually use the search bar like that. So we have a search bar in our app.js. I'll save it. It's going to fail on the page because we have nothing inside of here, but we'll quickly change that. We're going to import our CSS into here and build our component. So we'll say export default function search bar. Prompts will be passed if there are any. And inside of here, we're going to return an object. So this object that we're going to return, we're going to have a section. We're going to put a form with an input element and a button inside of it. So that's what we'll do right in here. So let's say we're going to have a section, and we can give it a CSS class name. We'll call it search bar, like that. Inside of there, we'll put a form. Inside the form, I'm going to have an input and a button. So type equals text, name equals, let's call it keyword. Just like that. Apologize if that noise in the background is loud. My dog is a few feet away from me just chewing on a bone. So we've got a button, type submit, and we'll give it a class name as well. Or let's call it search button. And name, make it the same thing. Now you'll notice here I'm using name and not ID. When you're writing fairly standard HTML, you'll probably be using IDs when it comes to form and input elements and so on. In here, I'm using name. And that's because if you're working with form data objects and you're trying to load things quickly, you need the name property to go in there. When you submit your form to the server, it needs to have the name property because that's what's being sent to the server. The ID is your connection to the CSS. The ID is your connection to some other JavaScript. In React, we're not targeting these DOM elements. We're letting React handle all the interactions with these different parts of our page. So I'll save that. So we've got an input with a name. We could add a CSS class name as well if we wanted to target this. Let's call it search text. All right, so I've got my search text, I've got my search button. The search is the word that's going to appear. And we'll just throw a little tiny bit of CSS inside of here. Let's do search bar, which is going to be the section that contains the whole thing. I'm just going to put a little tiny bit of CSS. We'll give it a background color. The default text color is going to be white. I'll throw in a blue background. I'll set the font size, the default font size for this. Now we can always play around with the styles more afterwards, but I just want to have a little bit of stuff in here. Okay, so that'll be enough for us to start with. All right, let's take a look in the browser and see what we've got. There we go. Some rendering errors from before as we didn't have the component built. I refreshed the page, they're gone now. So here's what we have. We have an input. I can type inside of there, and we've got a search button, which is by default going to want to submit, which, since we don't have an action for our form, it should just reload this page. I want to add event handling. So I want the person to be able to type in here. I want to know when the person has put focus onto this element. I want to know what they type, when they type, and when they submit. And I want them to be able to submit by either hitting enter or by clicking on the search button. Either one's going to work. Inside of our form, I'm going to add the onSubmit synthetic event. This is going to refer to some function on the page. And we just go up here above the return and we create our functions. So let's call this one submitted. There's going to be an event object passed in, the synthetic event object. We're going to have on the input, let's create a function called focused. So we'll listen for the focus event. We're going to listen for the input event. So changed as they type. And we'll have one for the button when it gets clicked as well. So here we are, bunch of functions, and I can now refer to these down here. So onSubmit equals submitted, just the name, no parentheses at the end, because we don't want it to run and then have the result of this function be assigned to this synthetic event handler. Inside of here, we could say console.log submitted. The other thing about submitting, if you want to stop it, just like in vanilla JavaScript, if I don't want my page to reload, I just want to know when they submitted it, and then I'm going to handle it and decide what to do with the submission of that form, we need to take the event object passed in here, and we're going to call prevent default. Same as we would in vanilla JavaScript. It looks the same. This is a different method because it's a synthetic event object right here. So this method is on the synthetic event, but it's written the same way and it runs and it does the same thing. Clicked. We're going to do the same thing as this. Down here inside of clicked, we want to stop the default action. If I click on the button, by default, it's going to want to submit the form. So we'll put clicked in here. And for changed, we'll say the onInput is what we're doing. And I'm going to write out ev.target. That is the thing that was just clicked on. And I want to get its value. Oh, sorry, not clicked on, but typed in. As the person is typing, the onInput listener gives us what they've typed in. Every character, every key that they're pressing gives us this event, and this is going to give us the total value. And we can do the same thing up here. Console for the focus. I'll just do that, on focus. Okay, so we have those. Now we'll add them here into our JSX. So the input is going to have an on focus and an on input. Those two things. The button, we're going to give an on click listener, like that. And then we just have to put in the name of the functions. So clicked was the name of the function here. Focused was the name of the function here. And there's another way that you can write this if you do want. We can put an arrow function like this and say, I'm going to call this changed function. And I do put the parentheses here because this is inside of my arrow function. So the onInput event is going to run this arrow function, and the arrow function is going to run this. The input will pass the event to here, and we can then further pass it along like this. So two different ways you can write it. One like this, the other inside of an arrow function like that. Whichever one makes more sense to you. Both of them are fine. Both of them do the same thing. Save that. and then we can go test this out. All right, so again, those errors, defined but not used, that was just as we were writing our code and as I was saving the page. Refresh, there are no errors, no warnings. So I click inside of here. I get the on focus. If I tab to the button, it's blurring it, and then I do Shift Tab to go back to it. You can see the on focus happened again. I go up to the planets, and then I hit Tab again to go back to the input. 3. It's happened 3 times. As I typed, every time I hit a letter, it's going to add. You can see here, it's calling the onInput function, and it's giving me, at that point, what has been typed so far. So you have that. Now, I click on the search button. That is going to call the click event, and then it should trigger the submit event. There's clicked. Submit is not running, and that is because we did prevent default inside of our click. So it's never getting to our submit. If I comment that one out, focus, I tab over or I click on the button, there, now we get clicked and submitted. If I come back into here, I'm inside the input, I type space world, okay, it's doing all these inputs. If I hit enter inside of here, we can see at the bottom, clicked and submitted were both called. Even though I'm inside of here, when you're inside of a form element and you hit enter, that will trigger the click of the submit button, as long as this button is registered as the submit one, and then it will also trigger the submit event. So both those are going to happen. And that's it. It's the same thing. You would apply these same rules, same approach, regardless of what the event is, regardless of what the object is. We have all of these synthetic events that mirror what you have in the DOM already. We just use it with this syntax. And you have to make sure that you capitalize that first letter of the second word. So on is lowercase, capitalize the second word. That's your event. And then you've got these 2 different ways of defining what function you want to call when that event happens. And that's it. So, hope that helps you understand there. I've got the references down in the description to both the synthetic event API reference and the handling events reference from the React DOM reference. And I've also got the link to the GitHub repo with episode 5. So the next episode we're going to have is going to be on using state within components, and the use state function. So stay tuned for that tomorrow. And as always, thanks for watching.